Hi, everyone. My name is Michael Berliner. I'm a senior growth product manager at Masterclass, and I'm excited to be sharing with you guys today some measurements and frameworks for growth optimization. For those of you guys that aren't familiar with Masterclass or haven't seen our SNL parodies, Masterclass is a online subscription service where you can learn from the very best in the world. So think Gordon Ramsay teaches cooking, or Annie Leibovitz teaches photography. So let's dive in. All right. What we're going to be talking about today is how do we really zero in and focus on the goal. I think everyone's time is really valuable and everyone's moving fast. So how do we make sure what we're doing is the most impactful thing that we can be doing with our time? And then from there, we can talk a little bit about creating a growth model to help understand how do your metrics span across different growth channels, and use that to as a language to communicate with other stakeholders as well as in executive meetings. And then we'll talk a little bit about how do we then execute and understand and what are the things that we should be doing in our strategies, growth strategies, and what shouldn't we be doing. So we'll introduce a scoring framework there, and then maximize, and then using that to then to take it and say, well, okay, these are the things that we're going to do. How do we maximize our efficiency and effectiveness on executing towards that goal? So first, I want to put this graph out there, and this is actually the top 5 reasons why startups or new products fail. And the reason why I put it up here is because I actually think it's really interesting that I would say 3 out of these 5 reasons are actually avoidable with focus. And so I say, if we can employ some of these processes and strategies, and the reason why they're so important is because if you're focused on understanding, how to develop the product in a way that helps you grow, you can obviously raise more funding in this case. You can outcompete your competitors. And so you really do have to have a strong framework. And when you think about growth, and the way I think about growth is it really is a process. And so when we're interviewing candidates for growth roles, we really dig into what is their process and how strong is it, how sophisticated and how diligent are they with executing. And some of you guys may be familiar with this book called The Goal. It's actually a required read for Amazon execs. And the reason why I like it is because it talks about this theory of constraints and about looking at the system as the whole. And basically argues that the goal of really any company is to make money, right? The problem is this isn't always ingrained in people's OKRs or goals or whatever it may be, is that we haven't really created the structure across our different departments or even within a department to say, hey, all the things that we're doing, how do they directly affect, how do they ladder up to this goal of making money? And so that's what I want to go through today, is to present some strategies and some ways to think about how we can tie everything back to make sure you're maximizing your impact on that goal. So that leads me into talking about how to create a growth model. If you're not familiar with a growth model is kind of like a financial model that's more centered around and structured around the metrics that you can affect. So rather than being more output metrics like how many people we're acquiring, is things like what's our conversion rate? What is our cost per click on our ads? What's our referral rate? These are metrics that we think that we can affect. But first, what are different growth levers that we should be thinking about? Here are some of the main growth levers that come up most frequently. And this is different for all different businesses. Some businesses, these are important, some of them are not. It's different for B2B. These are mostly consumer side, but also some branch over to B2B as well. But the point is that there's a lot of different things. There's a lot of growth levers. There's a lot of things that you can do, right? So the question is, how do we prioritize across these growth levers? That's what a growth model helps us do. So here are some of the common growth model metrics. This is just an example, and again, like I mentioned, it can change according to your business. But when you look through this, you'll see, we have 2 kind of core metrics per growth lever here, and we'll dive into this a little bit more. But one of them is kind of a volume metric, things like spend or purchases per visitor, or sorry, SEO visitors, things like that, partner refer visitors, and then one of them is a conversion metric. So you have the volume come in, and then you have the conversion, and that's what you get out. And in this case, what we get out is, spend per visitor or acquired revenue per visitor. And what you'll notice looking at this is actually, if you look across your business, this is really, the whole thing is CAC over LTV, right? We tend to think about CAC over LTV or LTV over CAC ratio as being just kind of contained within marketing and acquisition, but it really spans across the entire product. So we really do have all these metrics that are interrelated and are interconnected, yet most businesses and most companies don't spend the time to understand how these different metrics are related. You think, you need to be able to understand, like if you had a 10% increase in, decrease in cost per click, how does that then translate to impact to CAC over LTV, so that you can make those decisions and those trade-offs and have that conversation. So that's our CAC over LTV. You also have revenue, right? And those are really the two core metrics. And I talked some about the concept of like volume and conversion metrics. Well, these on the company level, I think about it as a health metric and a volume metric. CAC over LTV being the health metric and revenue being a like volume or like an overall growth metric. And so, like I mentioned, you want to understand for every change that you think you can get in one metric, how's that going to translate to this kind of ending growth metric that you're trying to achieve. Same thing with revenue. Like I mentioned, that's what I call healthy growth. And the reason why it's important to distinguish between these two types of growth metrics is that they can often be at odds with each other, or can be, you can use them as trade-offs. So for example, like the most common example is in paid marketing, where you can choose to spend more and you'll get more revenue, but it will come at the expense of efficiency and your overall cost to acquire. Now, ideally, you get both of them at the same time. That's definitely doable and feasible. It's 100%. So you, as a company, have to understand and be prioritizing which one is more important to you, to what extent. Do you want both? Because a lot of times people end up in situations where they're expected to achieve both. You see it all the time, and it's not always feasible. And so we have to have this language around, health and growth metrics and which one's more important to us at this time. It can change. So let's dive in a little bit further. This is what I call applying a don't do framework. And the reason why I want to really emphasize the don't do is because you really do have to decide, like, what do you not do? I mean, I'm sure a lot of people here throughout their careers can relate to the concept of just having too much to do and not enough time, especially if you're in, the startup environment, right? And so it's really important to be laser focused on what do we not want to do, how do we cut that out? But the question is, what do we not do, right? And so that's what I want to introduce the framework to help us understand that. But first, I want to talk a little bit about what is a growth process to set some foundation, so that we can kind of figure out what we want to score and what lays the foundation there. So this is how I organize a growth optimization process, and I think it's actually really applicable across any function. But we have, starting with ideation, then you have prioritization of those ideas. You have the execution against ideas that you want to do, or the hypotheses. And then you have the learnings, in which then feed back into ideation, right? So it's really a kind of a cycle or a loop. And it's really each one of these different stages, there's different levels of sophistication and different levels of how well someone can execute, or how well a program executes on these. And it's really important to do all these well, because like I mentioned, it is a loop and it is a cycle. And so what you find is, if any one of these are lacking or it's a breakage in the cycle, it really hurts the whole cycle. So it's important to know how well you're doing on these, and like how you can be really sophisticated and execute really effectively in these different areas. Now, we only have a certain amount of time, so we'll just talk first about the ideation and the prioritization stages. I'll give you a few kind of high-level cheat sheet on the second two, but we'll really just dig into the ideation and prioritization piece for now. So some of you may be familiar with this concept of ICE scoring, but for those of you that aren't, it stands for impact, confidence, and effort. So that's ICE. And it's just a really simple way to score your different ideas in a backlog of, let's just say you have 40 things in your backlog. It's a simple way for you to kind of mind map out how you're thinking about these things. So you can sort that and then say, okay, these are the top 10. And then you can use that to dive a little bit deeper. I also think it's really valuable just for conversations, right? So I'll ICE score it, and sometimes I'll show people, hey, this is how I scored it. this is why, and we talk about that. And so a lot of times I'll ask them to ice score as well, and so we can say, oh, you score this too higher than me, why? And we actually uncover a lot of interesting insights and expertise. It's like, oh, I didn't realize that this is the case, right? And this is why you have more confidence on that. Okay. And so we have a great learnings there just by itself. But ice scoring can be different for different people. I will say the point of ice scoring, like I mentioned, is to create a sort ranked list at the end of the day of, you want to do it on 40 or more ideas in a lot of cases. But it should be a fairly fast process. The problem is some people don't spend the time to do it because they just think it's going to take too much time. But when I do ice scoring, we're talking like 30 minutes to an hour max. The other thing is that you can do it on individual ideas. You can also do it at initiatives and different levels, however you want to do it. But I do, like at the beginning of the quarter, we'll look at 15 things we're going to do for the quarter and we'll ice score those. And it also helps me then communicate that out to stakeholders, to your manager, to executives, whoever it may be. So like I mentioned, you have, and this is structured in a certain way, impact over effort, because it's truly you want to optimize for impact per effort spent. So you have the impact to effort ratio. Like I mentioned, impact is estimated effect on the target metric that you're trying to achieve. So that could be one of those metrics from the growth model that we talked about before, or like a target output metric. For me and my team, we focus on the website conversion. So our output metric that we're trying to affect, our kind of North Star metric, is LTV per visitor, per person that comes to the site. Then you have also effort, and that's estimated person weeks of time. The way that we score these, and again, it can, however works best for you, but we do impact on a 1 through 5 scale. And that's the 1 through 5 scale for impact is roughly 5% increase each. So like a 1 would be a 5% estimated impact on target metric, and a 5 would be like a 25%. Whereas effort can be a little bit more of a open-ended scale, where we'll do half weeks of time of an engineer's time or whoever's time it may be. So it could be a 1, it could be a 2.5. It could be whatever, it could go up to, or you could do a 1 through 5 scale or 1 through 10 scale. Whatever works for you. The point of the exercise is to score and just score quick and kind of use your initial thought to kind of spur that discussion in that sort ranking. The other thing I'd point out is that it is a relative scale. So you don't have to be sure that something's at 25% on impact. But what you want to do is you want to go through and score all your ideas in the impact column at the same time. And you want to say, this one's a 5, and so therefore I think this one's a 4. And then by, relevant to that, this one's probably a 2. Because again, the end objective is to, rank these ideas from, highest impact, highest I score to lowest, not to be actually accurate with what the scoring means. And let's talk a little bit about confidence. Confidence is actually the most important scoring that people don't do. And I think it's because it just takes a little bit of thinking, and you have to challenge your own opinions. For me, confidence, just going back to this, for me, confidence in a lot of ways is derived from the source of the idea. If you think about things you're confident in, let's just say, there's a scientific paper, let's just say there is, newspapers that you follow or whatever it may be. A lot of it has to do with the source. How well do you trust the source? How well has it the fact been corroborated and looked into, and that kind of stuff. So when you talk about confidence of a hypothesis, for me, it largely comes down to the source of the idea. There can be other factors here too, but here are some of the main idea sources that we focus on, in our process. Most of you guys are probably most familiar with like just the one at the bottom, which is brainstorming. But it's actually really important to have a really diverse backlog. When we look at our backlog, there should be at least 3 or 4 of these sources in there, because that's going to de-risk it. I actually think that brainstorming is the least confident source, because you think about it, you're in a room with your peers and whoever else it is, and you're just coming up with ideas, right? So it's really not that proven, except from your own opinions and your own expertise that you're drawing from. I really like comparable products, especially if it is a product that's established company versus an emerging company, because you know that they've tested, and anything that's on their site or in their products has been tested and proven out. But we also learn a lot from prior experiments and doing data analytics. User research is also another really big one for us. especially when we're starting kind of a larger roadmap. We'll do a lot of user interviews. And, I'm sure that this is a part of all of your guys' processes. I'm sure that you guys, watching this session probably do all these maybe to some certain extents. But when you put it as more of a requirement, like, hey, our idea sources should have, 3 to 5 of these ideas, our backlog should have 3 to 5 of these idea sources always in there, it kind of changes it into something a little bit different. And so like I mentioned, we're really talking about confidence here, confidence of ideas. And we think about confidence as data combined with relevancy. So what that means is we want something that's proven. So like if you go to, like I mentioned, an established company's product, that's been proven out. But how relevant is that product to our product? So something can be really proven but not be relevant. So we want to take those both into account. So like I mentioned, a few of the ones that are important for us are comparables. We do a lot of teardowns. I do a lot of stuff with subject matter experts and doing user interviews. And we'll give them kind of a free masterclass subscription just to talk with us. And then we do a lot of on-site polling as well. That's one of my favorites, is when we get this more qualitative hypotheses, we'll then take those and play them back to people and say, hey, which of these were most important for your decision of whether to buy masterclass? And that will then give us a bar chart that we can look at and say, okay, this is actually the most important one hypothesis for us to work on right now. Well, let's talk a little bit about the impact portion of the ICE scoring. So let me just kind of stay here for a second. So impact, it's really about, like if you're trying to achieve this certain metric, for us, it's LTV per visitor, it's a conversion metric. The impact scoring and how you understand what's going to be most effective for people in your product, it really depends on like what's the decision going through people's mind when they translate into this metric, when they go to buy, right, or they go to pick back up the product or to reuse it or to whether they're going to renew, right? What is that decision going through their mind? Because that's going to determine the ideas that you come up with and how you can affect it. So it's really important to understand that dynamic. For conversion, here's an example. So I think about conversion as perceived value, and then you have kind of a modifier. You can have the perceived value on the page, but when you modify it with excitement, it's actually much more powerful. And then you have perceived costs times the context. So cost is only a cost, and by the way, cost can be money, it can be time, it can be opportunity cost, it can be a lot of things. But when you put it in context, it can actually very much diminish that. And so we want to be increasing the perceived value, excitement, and then relative to the perceived cost in the context. So I'll just walk you guys through how we implement some of this dynamic and how we then bring forward that into our hypotheses at Masterclass, just to show you some examples. So when we're asking people questions and we're doing user research, these are the type of questions that we're asking. And what you'll notice is it does kind of tie back to that equation that I showed you before. Of we're trying to understand where's the perceived value, what gets them excited, how are they perceiving the costs, and what would put it into context for them. And when we're doing comparables research, we also think about in the same structure and any other really idea source. And this gives us a little bit of sense of unity towards a direction of this metric that we're trying to achieve. Whereas if we just kind of went off and did a lot of ideation, we might not have that. So let's take a look at how we've implemented this kind of dynamic on the Masterclass site that's up there right now. And by the way, it might change if you look at it now and you're looking at this session because we're doing a lot of experiments. But diving in, you can see, here are some ways that we try to maximize perceived value. So you go onto the web page, you can look at the home page and the class pages. We have a page for kind of the main page and then a page for each class that we offer as well. And what you can see is that when we're showing the catalog, when we're talking about what's included in the subscription, when we're talking about topics covered in the class, there's a lot there. You can see a lot. So you're feeling like you're perceiving in terms of value that you're getting a lot, right? We have copy on the lessons. We are saying 80 classes, 20 lessons per class. So you feel like with a purchase, you're going to be getting a lot, right? So that's perceived value portion. Then we want to get them excited. And this can be different for every product. And again, this comes through user research, but we find, for Masterclass, if you've ever seen our videos, they're very exciting. We also find that people are really excited to see these people that they know, these celebrities, right? And they have this feeling of dopamine from this recognition. And so we started integrating into the site. We want to get them excited. We want them to feel the value and also get them excited about the product. So that when they're ready to make a purchase, it's like, no brainer. What about the perceived costs? What you'll notice is the one there in the bottom with the 10 minutes average per lesson, that's a time cost that we're trying to diminish, right? People don't have a lot of time, they're doing social media, so how do we reduce the perceived cost there? And even just bringing forward this information that they might not have known about is a way to reduce the perceived cost because they just didn't know about it. And so they'll assume that it's actually really high by default. You can also see in the way that we're presenting the price and creating some FAQs around the cost itself. Again, bringing forward that information that's going to help them get rid of these assumptions and give them the clarity that it's actually not as high of a cost as they thought it was going to be. And then what about the context of making it, and this really comes down to making it feasible for them in that moment. So the context is, okay, for me, I understand that the cost is this much, but like for me, can I do it right now? Can I make a purchase right now? And so what you can see is that throughout the product and throughout the website, we bring forward some of these more execution focused questions that come to mind of like, what is the class samples going to be like? Where can I watch? Am I going to be able to do it at any time at my own pace? These are all questions that they have that help them understand in the context that these costs actually aren't so bad. I can actually have a lot more flexibility than I thought. So that's just a quick run through of, an example of masterclass, how we implement kind of the ideation and prioritization with ICE scoring and how you can see that come to fruition on the site, and along with a deep understanding of the decision that users are going through when they're, in making a conversion decision in our case, that's going to ultimately affect that metric that we're trying to achieve. And like I mentioned, we don't have time to go through the execution and learning portions of that, but I will put up just a quick kind of cheat sheet of some different terms that come to my mind when we're talking about those different phases and stages and what's important to be really good at in those stages. Feel free to hit me up, LinkedIn, if you have any questions or you want to learn anything more about these different terms. So at the end of the day, you end up with an ICE scored backlog. You have impact over effort. You multiply that by confidence. That scoring can be different things to different people. Like I mentioned, we do 1 through 5 on impact, a 0.5 scale on effort, and that scales up by person effort weeks. In confidence, we do 50%, 75%, 90%. And you just multiply that out, you get a value score, and that lets you sort. And tying that all back to this concept of a don't do framework, we want to then take that backlog, especially if it's at the initiative level, like at a quarter planning level, and say, okay, the top 25% of things that we want to double down on, that we know what we want to do, we can't miss it. The bottom half of things on the list should be things that there's no way we're going to be getting to this. In any list, if it's more than 5 things, there should be half of them that you're not going to do in a quarter's time. And then lastly, you have the kind of second quarter, top quarter. These are kind of the quick wins or continue to evaluate type of things where you say, hey, we may not do this, things may evolve, but we want to kind of keep our eye on this and continue to evaluate and identify if there's some opportunities here that we can seize on. So let's just say you've done all these things. And again, I want to make sure that you understand this process that I just went through with you guys, and this ideation and this scoring process should be no more than a week, right? It doesn't have to be a whole thing. A week's time, we have a really strong backlog, but it's 100% worthwhile, and it's definitely something you should do if you don't already. And then how do we talk about execution on the team, and how do we maximize our team's overall output and throughput? Well, I think about a throughput funnel for any product manager, growth product manager out there. These are the 3 core metrics that I think about in our team. We have velocity, success rate, and average impact. And this can be used, this could really be used outside of product as well. But we have our test velocity, how many tests or experiments are we running per engineer that's on the team per week. And what is that success rate? An average success rate, oh, by the way, on velocity, a baseline, like the best practice or like leading edge team for that would be like Airbnb, and they do like 1 test per engineer per week, and that's like on their conversion team. And that's really really fast pace. Success rate, what percentage of those are positive with statistical significance that you will then implement into the product, right? An average good success rate is about 20 to 30%. So you should expect about 70% of your tests to either be flat or negative, which, by the way, is actually not a bad thing. You actually learn a lot from negative tests. What you don't want are flat tests. That tells you that you're not being ambitious enough with the test to even get a signal. And so you actually don't really learn a lot from there. Sometimes you do. Sometimes that is a learning in and of itself, though. You learn, hey, okay, actually this doesn't move the needle. That's totally fine as well. We actually celebrate all learnings, whether they're flat, down, or positive, and share that out. And lastly, you have average impact. This can vary dependent on the maturity of the company. So, for Facebook, a 1% might be a really big win. If it's earlier stage, maybe you're getting big, 20% wins. But in general, I think, unless you're a really mature company, a 5% is a good kind of bottom threshold to say, hey, we're trying to shoot for at least 5% average impact per winning test. And these metrics can change over time, and there's different ways to optimize for them. So let's talk a little bit about that. And this is just demonstrative, so just keep that in mind. Testing velocity. This is the top of the funnel in your kind of program health metrics. And the reason why this is more of like a steep curve where it goes up and it's sharp turnover is because there can be some really quick wins that can significantly increase your testing velocity. And I've listed some of them there on the right. We have experiment design, testing medium, and pod structure. And what I mean by those is how are we setting up the experiment in a way that it can be executed quickly, and how are we even making the design quick, right? Like one feedback session with design, one feedback session with engineering versus multiple iteration cycles. Do we need to A/B test in-house, or can we do it in Optimizer? Can we get the same answer at the poll? That's the testing medium. And then pod structure. Do you have all the resources on the team? Like, do you have dedicated analytics resources, dedicated design resources, and that kind of thing? Those are all things that if you change those, they can be really quick changes and can double your testing velocity. What about the test win rate? So this has largely to do with the backlog size and quality, as well as winning themes. And so going back to that ICE scoring and your idea sources, that's really where this comes from, is that do you have enough hypotheses in the backlog to de-risk it, and are they the highest quality, and do they have a high quality, high confidence idea sources behind them? That's really what's going to, kind of what goes in, what comes out as far as ideas, and that translates directly to the win rate. You also have the idea of winning themes, and also how to have losing themes. So when you do a couple of experiments towards a certain goal or certain user problem that you're trying to solve, how do you then make sure you're bringing that all together and saying, okay, this is a winning thing. We want to double down on this. There's more gold to be had here. Compared to the losing themes, where you also want to say, oh, okay, these couple things lost, and so we want to make sure we don't do any more tests on the side. And that's what's going to maximize and optimize your win rate. And you also have average lift per win. This one's actually pretty interesting because it can, like you can see, change significantly over time. The reason being is that it has to do with the optimization towards a certain goal over time. So you could have, as you start on a certain optimization goal or a certain page, let's just say, or experience, you learn that experience, you start to optimize, you get some quick wins, Then it kind of starts to level off as there's like less and less that you can kind of find in these like really big chunk wins. It continues to go down until it's more minor optimizations and tweaks. So that just has to do with maturity. I will say one of the main ways that you can increase your average lift per win is by doing more advanced data analysis and having the data science team on board. Because what they can do is they can understand and identify these outsized pockets of things you can push on. Like I mentioned, they'll have an outsized effect on your target metric. So they might see that doing this one thing upstream, this one action upstream, like, some of the famous examples with like Twitter, friending 5 people or whatever it may be, had huge impacts for their downstream engagement, right? So they might not have known that if you didn't kind of make this correlation between this certain action and a resulting action downstream. All right. Eventually, you can calibrate these metrics. So, for us, we look at these every quarter, or even throughout the quarter, and say, hey, what is our velocity? What's our win rate? What's our average lift per win, and how can we improve that? And so we look at, hey, our velocity increased by 40% this quarter. That's great. It's because we did this, and we can do more of this, or we're going to work on the win rate this next quarter. And so what you end up at the end of this is you have, some scored and sort rate backlogs by growth lever. And you want to maximize those for ROI per time invested. And that's what we do with that ICE scoring. They all roll up to the growth lever, like I mentioned. And here we want to more on the executive level optimize for which of these growth levers should we be investing into. And then this, if you have a growth model, all ladders back to the end goal of driving revenue and driving growth. You have to have that growth model and that way of thinking about the trade-offs and growth levers to have that. But just looking at this web, you can pretty clearly see that it's a really data-driven, hypothesis-based way that just has the most confidence and really allows you to focus in and be laser focused on achieving things that are going to increase the growth of your company. Well, thank you so much for joining this session. That's all the content I have for now, but I hope you enjoyed the session, and my website as well as my LinkedIn's, they're listed at the bottom right. So feel free to reach out to me, ask me any questions, and I'd love to connect and engage with you more. Thank you.